So this morning we want to encourage believers that waiting seasons are not signs of abandonment, but opportunities for renewal and preparation. The waiting room. I think it's safe to say that no one likes waiting. Whether you're in line at the DMV, sitting in the doctor's office, or tracking a package that seems to be stuck in transit, waiting always seems to test our patience. At least it does for me, especially the older I get, the harder it is for me to wait on things. Now multiply that frustration by years. You're not just waiting inside the doctor's office. You're not just waiting for that package. You're not just waiting for the time clock to click for you to get off. But now it's been years that you've been waiting. And that's where Israel finds themselves in our text this morning. They had been in exile, worn out, wondering if God had forgotten about them. Have you ever been there? In the midst of situations of life where you're waiting for a change to come, and you wait to the point that it feels like just maybe God has forgotten about you. The 40th chapter of Isaiah is what scholars call comfort chapters. It's the beginning, 40, 41, what they call comfort chapters. And that's because for the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, it was all about warnings and judgment. God was warning Israel and Judea about their disobedience and what was about to happen to them. And then all of a sudden, God shifts the tone. He goes from warnings and judgment to comfort. Comfort, comfort my people. Israel was in the waiting room, tired and restless, discouraged, and God reminds them waiting is not wasted when it's in His hands. Have you ever been in God's waiting room? Waiting on healing, on a breakthrough, on direction. Isaiah teaches us that in the waiting room, God is still at work. But to see the thing about waiting when we're in those situations is that it's hard for us to wrap our minds around the logic of what's going on that we don't see. Me and Cheryl talked about this morning about being in situations where you don't see the full picture and not understanding um, what people are dealing with sometimes. And even when we find ourselves in those situations where we're sitting and we're waiting on something, it feels like we're being neglected. Uh, so many times we sit in those waiting rooms, whether it's at the doctor's office or whatnot, and you hear the same conversations. I've been here this amount of time. I've been here that amount of time. It just don't seem like nobody remembers me. Don't let it be the emergency room. We all know what it's like to go to the emergency room. And you're sitting there and you're waiting and you're frustrated, but you don't know what's going on behind those closed doors. Because in that moment, what you're dealing with is your situation. You're in the midst of your sickness. You're in the midst of your pain. And I guess it's a natural human emotion when you're in the midst of those things that it seems that the world ought to stop for what you're feeling in that given moment. But behind those ER doors, there's things that's going on that you're not privy to, things that you don't understand. Believe it or not, sometimes behind those swinging doors that we go through, there's somebody back there who's in a worse condition than what you're in. Sometimes there's somebody back there that's receiving the worst news of their life. There's somebody back there that's struggling with something. There's oftentimes being privy to this in the situations that we have gone through in our own family. We find out that once you go through those doors, sometimes off to the side, there's a little room there where a family is meeting with a chaplain and they're having some very tough discussions. But outside, there's complaints and there's frustration because we're in the middle of waiting for something that we need ourselves. So I'm sure that's not something that anyone in this room is immune from. We've all been in those situations of waiting, and waiting can become frustrating. especially when those of us who are the Christian faith, we put our trust and our faith and our hope in the God of restoration, the God of second chance, and the God who hears and answers our prayers. And we go through the process of doing exactly what God has do. We cast our cares upon him. We pray and we ask for his help. And then it just seems like sometimes we're still sitting there in that waiting room, wondering, what is God doing on the other side of those doors? Why hasn't he come to see about me yet? Well, as we look at this scripture this morning, as God shifts his attention through Isaiah from judgment and punishment for what Israel and Judea had did, and he shifts it to giving them comfort, we begin to learn some things about God and God's natures. And as it relates to waiting in the midst of hard times and trials and tribulations, one thing that we learn about God is God does not grow weary. That's what we learn specifically in verse 28 this morning. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Yahweh is the everlasting God, the creator of the whole earth. He never grows faint or weary. There is no limit to his understanding. Israel felt like they were forgotten. They were in exile. That means they were moved from their homeland and moved somewhere else. They were in an uncomfortable situation. Nothing about the situation was enduring to them. Exile made them wonder if God had grown tired of them. Isaiah declares Yahweh is everlasting. He created the whole earth. He never grows faint or weary, and his understanding has no limit. This is why the comfort chapters begin here, because the people needed to know their God was still powerful, still aware, still caring. So when you're in God's waiting room, we have to remember that God is not tired. He has not forgotten about you. Even though you are tired, God is not tired. Now, when it comes down to this thing that we call tiredness, so I'm sure by now you figured out that tiredness can manifest itself in so many different ways. We oftentimes think about the physical. I'm physically tired. I'm physically worn down. I've put too much on my plate. I've worked too many hours and I'm trying to take care of home. And then I'm taking on this task and that task, and we become physically tired. Can I ask you a question this morning? Have you ever found yourself in a place in your life where it's just not physical tiredness that you're dealing with, but you're also going through these situations in which your weariness is based on spiritual terms? And not just spirituality, but sometimes you're also mentally tired. Have you ever dealt with so many things? And I know the answer to this is yes. Have you ever dealt with so many things at one time that your spirit begins to cry out, Lord, have mercy? That your mind gets tired. Have you ever been tired of just thinking? Of the cars moving around in your mind, and you got all these problems and all of these situations and all of these obstacles that you're trying to overcome, and you're sitting there and you're sitting in the midst of your situation and your mind will not turn off, to the point that when you go to bed at night you don't even get a decent night's sleep because your mind is still turning. Your spirit is jumping because something just feels off. And that's how it is oftentimes in our waiting season. Sometimes I got up this morning, I told my wife, I said, something just feels off. Something feels disconnected. Something feels not quite right. Something feels not altogether there. But then as you reflect upon life and the situations, you find yourself that in some aspect, all of us are playing some type of a waiting game. We're waiting for something to happen. We're waiting for something to change. We're waiting for bad days to get better. We're waiting and we're hoping with anticipation that those things that we have stressed about and worried about are somehow God's going to step into the midst of these situations and he's going to fix whatever it is that's ailing us, that's bothering us, that's stressing us, that's making our spirit jump, that's making our mind jumbled up. And we're in this game of waiting and we feel disconnected. Something's not right. And that's where Israel is. They were in exile. They were away from home. Yes, they had did something that was wrong, but they trusted in a God of second chances. And they're waiting. They're distressed. But see, the thing about waiting is usually is not comfortable. If you go into these offices, whether it's the doctor's office or ER or a lawyer's office or some waiting room somewhere, you will find that most of these waiting rooms are not set up for your ideal comfort. You're not going to find the same type of seating there that you're going to find at home, right? The seats are going to be a little bit more uncomfortable, a little bit harder. You're not going to be able to just get up out the seat and stroll to the refrigerator and get you something cold to drink while you're waiting. That's usually not one of those options. It's usually uncomfortable. I said that to say this is that in our waiting seasons spiritually, sometimes we're sitting in situations that where we're sitting is just not comfortable. That seat that we're in is just not comfortable. Sometimes we're sitting in a seat that comes with a lot of responsibility, and sometimes massive amounts of responsibility can bring about feelings of not being comfortable. Sometimes when you're sitting in the season of waiting, you're sitting here and you're sitting in the seat that causes you to have to make some decisions that not only impact you, but impact other people. And when you got other people's lives in your hands, and it can cause you to feel this thing that's uncomfortable. And sometimes when you're sitting in these seats and you're waiting, you're sitting in this place of trying to make sure that what you're doing and what you're saying and where you're going is not just aligned with the visions that you have seen for your own life, but it's aligned with the visions what God has said about you. In other words, you want to make sure that the words of your mouth and the meditation of your heart is being found acceptable in God's sight. So you're sitting here in a situation and you're waiting, and the waiting does not feel good. It can be confusing. It can be stressful. And in these waiting seasons, the temptation is to get discouraged in the waiting because we feel like there's something different about me that shouldn't cause me to have to wait right here. God, I've been faithful. God, I've done what you asked me to do. God, I've done all these right things, but here I am, and I'm still waiting. And then we start to look at the comparisons. Have you ever been sitting in the ER? And you've been there for an hour and someone comes in and they're for 10 minutes and somehow they get back there before you do. And you start to compare. Well, they look like they're fine to me. They look okay to me. But you don't realize that they came in presenting with some symptoms that you did not have, that you could not see visually. But you're looking at the outward appearance and you say, well, they look fine to me. So you start comparing yourself to other people. Why did they not have to wait as long as I had to wait? Why did they find their spouse so fast? Why did they find their dream job so fast? Why did they find their home so fast? Why did all these things happen to them so fast? Because you see, the thing is that sometimes when you're waiting, if you're not focused on the right things, your mind becomes so idle that you start focusing on the wrong things. That's why it's been said that the idle mind is the devil's playground, because when you're sitting there and you're not focused on the right, things are introduced to your mind that takes you from point A to point B when you need to be sitting in point A and waiting for whatever it is that God has for you. So here is Israel, serving a God who does not grow weary while they themselves are weary. Yeah, everything that Isaiah says here, do you not know? Have you not heard? Yahweh is the everlasting God, the creator of all earth. He never grows faint or weary, and there is no limit to his understanding. But we are not him. We do grow faint. We do grow weary. And there is a limit to our understanding. And I'm here to tell you this morning that sometimes our power rests in the realization that we are weak and that there is a limit to our understanding. Because if we trust God the way we say we trust God, and he has no limit to his understanding, and he has all things in his control, then we have to understand that even while we are waiting in our weariness, not understanding God's plan, God is never getting tired, and he has a purpose in all of his plans. The second thing that we learn in the midst of the weariness and the waiting is that God strengthens the weary. That's what he tells us in verses 29 through 30. He strengthens the weary. He gives strength to the weary, and he strengthens the powerless. Youths may faint and grow weary. Young men may stumble and fall. So God gives strength to those who are weary. Even the strongest people grow tired. And Isaiah uses the image of youth and young men here, symbols of energy and vitality. When you think about energy and you think about youth, you think about those who are young, how they can run and they can play and they can jump and they can do all these things. So Isaiah gives them as an example, and he says even they get tired. Even those who are young and have all this energy, even they stumble and fall. He says God gives strength to those who are weary. He gives power to those who don't have any power. And this is a direct encouragement to the exiles who are drained by waiting. So understand, your weakness is not wasted. It is the very place that God pours his strength. When we cry out and we say, God, I want more of you. I need you closer to me. I want you to understand this morning that the place that God gets closest to you is in the midst of your weakness. The place where you're going to feel God's presence the most is when you are the most weary. And even though God teaches us through Christ that we are not to worry, I'm here to tell you this morning that one of the places that you will find God the most is in the middle of your worrying. It's in the middle of your confusion. It's in the middle of your heartbreak. It's in the middle of your sickness. It's in the middle of your despair. That's where God begins to pour into you when we need more of him. And you know, it has been a revolving theme here that I've told you time and time again, that when we go through these situations and we get stronger, it's not without cause, because I can promise you, I can guarantee you that whatever you're going through right now, there's going to come a season when you're going to go through something similar, or you're going to go through something worse. So right now, while you're sitting in your waiting room and you're going through the weariness of waiting for God, who said that he would never leave you nor forsake you, but right now you're feeling left and you're feeling forsaken, right now, right there, that's the place where God is pouring into you. Right there in that place. Right there. He gives strength to those who are weary. And he strengthens the powerless. And that's where we are. Can we be honest with ourselves this morning to admit that regardless of how spiritually mature we are, how long we have known the Lord, how long we've been coming to church, how many chapters we've read, how many Christian songs we've seen, can we admit this morning that we sit here as imperfect people who don't truly have any power? We are dependents, and we are dependent upon the Almighty. We can't walk without him. We can't talk without him. We can't move without him. We can't think without him. There is nothing we can do except it be because of him. We are sitting here powerless. But in this word this morning, Isaiah says to those who don't have any power, God gives it to you. He takes you from a place of cannot, and he reestablishes you into a place of I can. The moment that you stop trying to walk in the power that you do not exist and start walking in the power that God gives you. We are powerless, but he is all powerful. So what we don't accomplish under our own strength. We accomplish under his strength. And that's why you can take us meek and without and put us before kings and queens and powerful people, and we can make things move not under our own power because we're walking in under his authority. That's why I told you a few weeks ago that when you walk into that room knowing who you are, walk into that room knowing who you represent, because you're not walking in under your own name. You're walking in under the name of the Almighty. And when you walk into a place under the name of the Almighty, the atmosphere has no choice but to change. Situations have no choice but to change, because you are not up under your own strength. You're up under the one who strengthens those who are weary. Lastly, waiting brings renewal. Isaiah has told us that God gives strength to those who are weary, and he strengthens the powerless. And he says that the youth, even they may faint and go weary, and young men stumble and fall. But then Isaiah says something that's impactful. All these many centuries ago, it's still impactful to us today. He says, even though you're weary, even though the young folks even faint, those who trust in the Lord, they're going to renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Waiting brings renewal. To wait means more than just passing time. It means trusting, because you cannot wait if you don't have some trust. It means hoping. You cannot wait unless you have some hope. It means leaning on God with expectation. You cannot wait unless you're leaning on God, expecting that he's about to do something great. Isaiah says to those who wait on the Lord, they receive renewal. So while you're sitting in your waiting room, this is what happened. While you're sitting there, God pours into you and you receive new strength. That means you have power to keep on going. While you're sitting there, you receive new vision. That means you now soar on wings like eagles, and you're gaining God's perspective. You're gaining new endurance. You run and you don't grow weary. You walk and you don't faint. So waiting in God's hands is never wasted. It is where he prepares us. It's in the wait. Right there in the wait is where he strengthens us when we need it the most. And it's where he renews his people. Right there in the wait. So real life, in the seasons of waiting, don't mistake the silence for absence. God is still working. That's the temptation. Have you ever sat in the waiting room so long that you start to wonder if they actually forgot about you and went home? I have been in the back so long that I actually stuck my head out the door and made sure that people were still there. But don't mistake the silence of God for his absence. God's not going to cut the lights out on you. He's not going to leave you there by yourself. He's an ever-present help in time of trouble, is what the scripture tells us. So we learn in these situations, even in this example that was just given, we can't trust mankind in the middle of our wait. But we can always trust God in the middle of our wait, because he's ever present. He's right there in the midst of the situation. And something else that we need to learn is We need to give a name to our waiting room. What is it that you're trusting God for right now so that you can focus your prayer life? So you can focus your hope, focus your desires, focus your aspirations. Don't be afraid to tell God what I'm waiting for, what you need Him for, what you're hoping for, what you're desiring. Put a name to your wait. And here's a big one. Use your waiting time as preparation time. Pray in the midst of your waiting. Serve in the midst of your waiting. Grow in the midst of your waiting. Learn how to trust in the midst of your waiting. If you got to wait, you might as well put your wait to good use. Don't just sit idle, but do something in your waiting. That's always a good time to prepare for what God is about to do. And then share encouragement with someone else who is in their own waiting room. Sometimes when we're sitting in these physical waiting rooms, the things that help us pass the time is communication with others who are also waiting. If it wasn't for the fact that we're sitting there and we're talking to someone else who is already in the midst of their own waiting season, we might lose a little hope. Had an acquaintance some years ago, I believe I told you about, he was a firefighter, and he lost his leg in a fire from his knee down. And in the process, he also had some burns, and he was traveling back and forth down to Atlanta, and he was sitting there talking to this guy in the waiting room. And he was down and in despair and complaining about losing this portion of his leg. And then the guy lifted up his pants leg and showed him that he was wearing 2 artificial legs. So in the waiting room, he found out that he had something to be thankful for. Right there in the waiting room, he found out that even though his situation was bad, somebody else's situation was worse. So sometimes, the thing is that individual who had lost both his legs didn't have to show him anything. He didn't have to say anything. He could have sat right there and listened to him talk and be down in his sorrow and not said anything. But instead, he encouraged him that your situation, though it might be bad, it's not as bad as my situation. And guess what? Even that individual who lost both his legs was sitting in a hospital waiting room, and there were other people around who were in worse condition than what he was in. I don't care where you at and what you're waiting through. There's somebody else going through something worse than what you're going through. And oftentimes in Christian life, we like to do this super spiritual thing where we act like everything is okay, and we keep what we went through to ourselves, and we don't use it to encourage anyone else. But that just doesn't fit the character of God, because I told you before that we're not supposed to do life by ourselves. That's why so many people in this world. That's why God gives us so many people. He never intended for us to do life alone. So in the waiting rooms of life, we have to take our life experiences and tell somebody else, this is how I made it. This is how I survived. This is why I still have hope. Even though I'm sitting in a situation that for most people, it might seem hopeless, this is why I still have hope. Because I serve a God who gives strength to those who are weary. I serve a God who gives power to those who don't have power. I serve a God who is still, regardless of what people want you to believe, regardless of what the enemy wants you to believe, we serve a God who is still, to this day, a healer. He is still healing folks right now, miraculously, beyond the explanation of what mankind can give. He's still a healer. So we sit in the midst of what we're going through, and I'm trying to get you to understand this morning, as hard as it is to sit in the middle of the mess you're in, you got to sit there with some amount of hope and some amount of trust in a God who is able. Because the scripture says he is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above what we ask or think. Whatever we think God is capable of, he can do exceedingly and abundantly above that. So we sit in the waiting room knowing that we serve a God who is able. Psalms 27:14 tells us, wait for the Lord. Be strong and courageous. Wait for the Lord. Lamentations 3:25, the Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him. Galatians 6:9, so we must not get tired of doing good, for we will reap at the proper time if we don't give up. 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. So you're sitting in your waiting room. When the door finally opens, when you're sitting there and it feels like you've been there forever, you don't know what's happening behind that door. But then your name gets called. Someone steps out and they says, we're ready for you now. In that moment, all the waiting made sense because you realized that you weren't forgotten. You realized that you hadn't been ignored. You were simply being prepared for the right time. And that's how it is with God. You may feel stuck in his waiting room, but one day the door will open. And when it does, you'll see that the Lord was working behind the scenes the whole time. The waiting wasn't wasted. It was preparing you for your renewal. It was getting you ready for your new strength, bringing you in line with the perfect peace that he was about to give you. So don't give up in the waiting room. Don't get discouraged in the waiting room. Don't sit and complain in the waiting room. The God who never grows weary, he's getting ready to call your name. Israel needed comfort in their exile. You and I need comfort in our waiting. God says waiting is not wasted, it's preparation. So if you're in God's waiting room, don't quit. Don't lose heart. He's renewing your strength. He's lifting and shifting your perspective. He's preparing you for your endurance. He's getting you ready. Just tell the Lord, I feel weary down here in this waiting room. Please renew my strength. I feel weary. Help me soar above my circumstances with your perspective. I feel weary. Teach me endurance in this waiting room of life. And the God who hears and sees all, he will take you by your hand. He will wrap his arms of protection around you. He will bear you up in every aspect that you are falling down, strengthening you in every aspect where you are weak, keeping your mind in perfect peace, those who seek for him. That's That's who he is. That's what he does. We just have to learn how to wait.